Last time we talked about numeric data types. Now we're going to talk about non-numeric data types. And there are three that we're going to focus on. First off is strings. We also have booleans, and we have the none type. So beginning with strings, and the function to create a string is str, and then you give it some text. And this will turn whatever you give it and turn it into a string type variable. So these contain text data. So it is just plain text, like what you would see in a .txt file. These strings are wrapped in quotation marks. They can be single quotes or double quotes. It is up to you to be consistent. Usually the Pythonic way is to use single quotes, but out of habit, I still use double quotes. So you can see an example here. You can use, again, single or double. Just make sure they match. Characters in a string are referenced using index notation. I'll show you how that works when we switch over to Visual Studio Code. You can reference an individual character. You could reference a range of characters, or you can follow some kind of pattern. I'll show you all of these. So there is no strict limit to how long these can be, and strings can potentially be absolutely massive. Depending on how your data is coming in, strings can be some of the largest data types you'll work with. So an important function to know about is len. You give len some kind of string, and it will come back with how many characters there are in that string. So let's see all of this in action. We're going to click back over to Visual Studio Code. We're going to scroll down, give ourselves some room to work here. So we're going to do strings. Let's create a simple string. We'll call it username. And we'll set it to Scarlett J. Maddox. So we can, if we needed to, we could say str, and then encase this in parentheses. You could also do this if you fed this a number, and that number would be stringified. So now let's show some ways that we can print this. So print username. You can just print the whole thing. Or we can do our index notation, and that is done using a pair of square brackets. We call this notation sub. So when we say want the first character of the string, we would say username sub 0. Always, when you're using index notation, the first one is always 0. It goes from 0 to length minus 1. So if we were to do this, a print username sub 0, that would return just the letter S. Now, let's say we want the last letter. We do print username sub minus 1. And that's going to print X. Now, let's do print username sub 0 colon 5. And that's going to print the first 5 letters of the username. So SCARL. So that's how you print a range. Now, let's say we want to print every other letter. Whoops, what am I doing there? Username sub, let's say we want to print from the first 10 letters, so 0 to 10, we want to print every other letter. So this third number here, after our second colon, this is our step indicator. So it tells us we're going to do one, then the next one, we're going to skip, and then we're going to print the third one. So effectively what we're doing by saying 2 is every other one. If we were to replace that 2 with a 3, it would print every third letter. So let's do S, skip CA, then R, skip LE, and then print T. Now, we don't necessarily have to have all of these in order to use the different notations. So let's say we did print username sub, let's say 0. We'll do it double colon. We'll say 2. So this is going to print from the beginning to the end every other character. So let's save this and see it in action. Whoops. There we go. So you can see how it prints differently. And we're going to do a lot more with strings as we go along. We're going to learn how to replace characters. We're going to learn how to modify them. We're going to take some more complex data, turn it into a string, or take the string and turn it into a collection of some sort. You're just going to see a lot more with strings. For now, this is the very most basic. So with that, we're going to move over to Booleans. And Booleans are going to come into play more so when we start talking about conditionals. But a Boolean is a true or false value. Notice that the T and F in true and false is capitalized. So if you write true or false and you want that to be a Boolean value, you need to capitalize the first letter. That is how Python knows, okay, you're wanting the true or false value. So we can explicitly create a Boolean with bool x. You usually don't have to do that. If you're trying to make a Boolean, then your expression is going to be pretty obvious. But if you need it, you can always do bool and then your expression inside parentheses. Again, most often associated with logical expressions, this is things like conditional statements. When we start talking about if statements, you're going to see Boolean come into play a lot. And when you're evaluating anything else as a Boolean, it's important to know that 0 is false, none is false. Look at the none type on the right column. That is another false value. Any number that is not 0 is true. It's like it says, evaluating numbers, strings, collections, etc. always returns true unless it is empty or 0. So an empty list or an empty string is going to be false. If you give those any other information, they are true. And that can make your code really more readable or really compact depending on how you use it. So just to show you, Boolean, let's just say true value equals true. Now, we're going to get more into operators and how we can generate true or false values when we start talking about conditionals. You're not often going to see just true or false being explicitly stated. But anyway, we're just going to print it for fun. Save it. And let's run our code again. And you can see there's true. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is the none type. This is not something that has a range of values. It is always a null value. So it is, as it says, a data type for the none object. And what that means is it is just a null thing. It represents nothing, not even 0. So mathematically, 0 is not nothing. But in here, we have the none type, which is nothing. So the none object represents no value. It is a return value of any function that does not return anything. That'll make sense later. Just keep that in the back of your mind. If something doesn't explicitly return a value, it technically returns the none type. It is also a common default return value. So like if something comes back as a none type, you could say either that is everything working fine or something went wrong. So applications and error checking, especially in error checking, because if you're trying to look into a file and it returns none, you have a problem, and that's something that needs to be corrected. So we're not going to demonstrate this one in action because there's nothing to demonstrate. Just be aware of this data type. And for now, that will do us for talking about non-numeric types. Next time, we're going to just dip our toes into collection types. This is actually, there are 3 types of collection types. You have your list, you have your sequence, your sets, you have your mappings. So we're going to see these 2 a lot as we go through the later lectures. So I want to just have them in the back of your head. We're going to talk about what these are in the next lecture. So stay tuned for that.